and gentlemen.
Hey.
Hello guys, welcome back and happy Sunday to you.
Hello, hello.
Right, so don't forget, once you finish taking pictures, if you'd wish to ask our panel any questions, then stick your hand up and we will be bringing the microphone round to you. But I will kick them off first of all. Ron, how long did it take you to create the world for Caprica that we now see on our screens?
Well, we started developing Caprica probably somewhere in the third season of Battlestar Galactica. And Rami Aubuchon and myself and David Icke sat around and sort of talked about, what the world of Caprica would be and how it relates to Battlestar. And fortunately, we had said a lot of things about Caprica, the colony in the run of Battlestar Galactica. So we had a baseline to work with. But it took like 3 or 4 months to pound out the script and really sort of get our arms around the virtual reality aspect of it and the religious problems between the monotheists and the polytheists, and sort of really to flesh out the universe. It took like 2 or 3 months.
And in terms for you, Esai, when you saw the script and what you're going to be doing, what was your reaction to it?
I thought it was rather smart. I was relieved. You get tired of playing the same type of characters, or at least getting offered that kind of work or auditioning for things, And I just was relieved to see something that had humanity, warmth, depth, character, strength. So I said, finally a guy I can play without having to play the usual stereotypical conventions.
And for both of you then, the success of Caprica is growing day by day. What is that like for you to experience?
Oh, it's great. It's very gratifying to see that, when people come to the show, they stick around and they tell their friends. And so we saw the ratings over the last 4 to 5 episodes of the season start to really climb, and see that, we were starting to strike a chord with the audience, and the critical response has been great. And, it's always really gratifying when people like what you do.
For me, it's been great. I'm noticing the Jaguars out here, Rolls Royces, Bentleys. I'm just kidding, guys. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see that your effort leads to connectivity. People get it, and they marry it in a way that you're not always expecting. Although I was told, watch out, you're going to be in a new world. Sci-fi fans are different. They're really avid, and they know their stuff, and they're smart, so keeps you on your toes.
In terms of you, one of the challenges for creating a show like this, Ron, and in a sense, to a lesser degree, Battlestar for you, how did you make the Cylons as a sympathetic character for Caprica? Because everyone's got this preconceived notion of them being bad, them being evil, and then on Caprica, we're trying to have to sympathize with them a bit.
Well, I think it's all about the fact that the way into the story is through, the eyes of this teenage girl. So because she's one of the lead characters and you're following her story from the very beginning, the opening shot is, of Zoe Greystone in the virtual world, and then Zoe A, the avatar, as we call her on the show. And I think as you understand her journey and you understand how she became the first Cylon and sort of what forms the basis of Cylon belief, I think you're sort of forced to sort of reevaluate what you think of the Cylons, what your preconceptions are. And I think that's always one of the things that I enjoyed about Battlestar, was the ability to sort of put the audience in positions where they weren't quite sure, who they should be rooting for in any particular scene. And I think if you're able to do that, then you've really captured, something special.
For you as well, Esai, your character deals with kind of 2 worlds, essentially. They've got the real world of what he's experiencing on Caprica, and then you've got the virtual world where he's trying to find his daughter and reconnect with her via that. How do you find that challenging as an actor?
Well, it's wonderful. The challenge is, I use a parallel technique basically, and it applies. How many parents out there have no clue what their kids are doing with these little video games? And it's a world that they know, and when you try to get involved, you feel so inadequate. You feel completely out of your league. And that's what my character Joseph Adama feels when he goes into this world. He needs someone basically to guide him through it. And that's one of the characters that you've met if you've watched the show towards the end of the first half. Emmanuel. he needs someone to help him, otherwise he's useless in this world, kind of like I am at some of those Xbox games.
And don't forget, if you'd like to ask your questions, please feel free to stick your hand up. Oh, there you go.
Don't be shy.
They don't bite. We do feed them, bless them. I got a gentleman here first of all.
If this goes as far as Battlestar did with 4 or 5 years, where do you intend to end up? Where does it fall within the Galactica sort of universe as such?
We really haven't decided that yet. I think looking forward from where Caprica is to the beginning of, say, the Battlestar miniseries, there's at least a half a dozen points where we could end the show potentially, and potentially more. But, we really haven't thought that far ahead yet, and I think we'll probably get a better feel for that somewhere after the 2nd or 3rd season.
A question from a lady off to the side here.
Hello. After sticking with Lost for 6 years, I have to say that Battlestar's ending was much more satisfying. Was you happy with the ending that you did for
Of Battlestar? I was very happy with it. I was very satisfied with the story, with the performances, and the way it was all put together at the end. I know that all of us that worked on the show felt very good about the finale, and I'm happy with it. And I know that there are people that continue to sort of argue about it one way or the other, but that's great. I'm glad that it elicited some response from the audience, that people feel passionately enough about it to continue to argue about it to this day. But for me personally, I wouldn't change any of it. I'm very happy with it.
And for when you're designing an ending for Battlestar, you're thinking how you're going to end it. Does you feel pressure as a writer and a creator of a series to do that for the fans, to make it? And on a similar to for you, Esai, when you're actually acting on a series that is coming to an end,
I don't know what that's like.
Okay, fair enough. We'll just see if we're wrong. But for you, Ron, how much pressure did that add to what you've got to do?
Well, we thought about it quite a bit over the course of that last season, because we knew the 4th year was going to be our last year, because I sort of decided after the end of season 3 that, okay, we've moved into the 3rd act of the show. It's time to end it, and we should bring it to a conclusion. So we spent a lot of time in the writer's room literally going over and over all the different plot threads, deciding what we were going to wrap up, what we were going to just let go and that didn't matter. And, there was a lot of pressure for us internally just to do the best work that we can, to go out at the top of our game and to really make the end of the show worthy of the series that had gone before. I mean, we wanted to give fans the satisfaction of seeing the conclusion of many stories and many characters that they've been following over the years, but most of the pressure was just internal. It was mostly just us just challenging ourselves and wanting to do better and really wanting to make the ending as strong as possible.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next question over here.
Hi. I'm loving the series, but I wanted to ask you something about the Soldiers in the One and the monotheism story. Because that seemed really strong in the pilot, and then it seemed when we got going on the main series that it lost its way a little bit before it got going again. And I wonder why we ended up, what the thinking was behind going down the Clarice having the group marriage story, rather than moving on quite strongly with the SDO side of it.
Well, it was all about figuring out which stories we were going to emphasize at what point, and how fast we were going to move certain plot lines forward and how slow we were going to move some. We have a large ensemble. We have even more characters beyond the main cast to deal with. And, one of the things that you do in the first year of a television show is you're figuring out what the show really is. You've got the pilot, but the pilot is not really indicative of the series generally. So once you start getting into the episodic, storytelling, you're trying to figure out what's the rhythm of the show. If you look back at what you've seen so far in season 1, you'll see that we tried a variety of mixtures. Some weeks we would dive into literally every single character and continue their storylines. Other times we sort of focused on one or two. Sometimes we sort of bounced back and forth. I think by the time we got to the second half of the season, you started to see that we were starting to feel like, okay, we don't literally have to service every single character every week. Some weeks we can focus more on the Adamas. Some weeks we can focus more on Clarice. Sometimes we'll focus more on STO. It's just really about finding out what's the rhythm of the show that works best for this series. And the Clarice group marriage idea and story was one of the things I was really in love with, and really liked the idea of setting her in an interesting nuclear family that isn't normally seen on television. And I thought, well, this is an interesting dynamic. It says something about their society. It says something about her. And I thought, that's a fascinating sort of arena just to tell basic character drama. So I liked all those stories, and you'll see more of it in the second half of the season. But the STO component was just figuring out, okay, how often do we want to go to the well of the STO? How often should they be doing something? We wanted to sort of delineate some of the internal divisions within STO. There were the more hardline faction. There were the moderates. There was sort of this structure back on Geminon where the hierarchy was kind of based. You'll see a bit more of that in the second half of the season as well.
And in terms for you, Esai, what's it like? Because the character that you're playing, Joseph Adama, he's got lots of conflicting sides to him. He's trying to deal with his own identity, the loss of his daughter. How much of a challenge was that for you to play all of those parts of the character over such a short period of time?
Well, it is a challenge. One of the things that strikes me is that not only his daughter but his wife as well. And I kind of during the pilot had to remind some folks that we were so focused on his daughter that we had to remind that eventually the concept would be, if that works out well, he'd like to get his wife back as well. He'd like to he wants to fix his family, reconnect, recreate. The thing is, I'm about to start my own, so I don't have that well to draw from, but I can imagine, I can use parallels. And I can't wait till we get a second season so I can apply what real life has taught me into the character, so that I may not have to try as hard. It's just evident. It's in your DNA. But the interesting thing, I just want to get back to the whole alternate lifestyle thing. I have a brother who's gay, and it's not an issue. And normally, in the old world, that's looked down upon. So would group marriages. So that's one of the reasons I also thought the show was bold, because it showed that alternative lifestyle is possible. It's the way you approach it. On Caprica, who you do is up to you. It's your business. And I respect that, and there are traditionalists, but there's room for different types, and you just don't judge it. My brother is just as much a man, if not more, than other people who may have traditional relationships. And I love that it's not an issue. I love him no matter what, and we deal with his husband, and it's just, I found that refreshing. Regardless of what people think about it, as a society, I don't think we're allowed to do that often. And so that's why I think sci-fi or these types of shows give you a chance to dwell on those issues. But the challenge, it's pretty intense. I mean, especially when you have to play losing your daughter and watching her kill herself. I mean, it's very challenging as an actor, because you don't want to over-emote. There are technical issues that you have, because if you do too much, there's nothing for the audience to do. Do you know what I'm saying? If you overplay it, you can scare your audience, or it becomes hammy or whatever it is. So we have to constantly mix our own performances. If you do too little, the audience can't identify. But again, if you do too much, they cringe. So it's a challenge to juggle all that, hit your lines, and do it as if it were for the very first time.
Finding your own balance, essentially.
Absolutely.
So, okay, if you like a question from right over the back there. This gentleman here.
Ron, what lessons could Star Trek learn from the success of Battlestar Galactica?
Oh, I don't know that I have anything to teach Star Trek. I mean, Trek is such a huge franchise, and it's going very strong. And I think that JJ's movie did exceptionally well, and I thought that I enjoyed it and walked out of the theater with a smile on my face. And I thought, what, that's what that franchise really needed, was new blood, to go in, really start over, to go back to the beginning, go back to Kirk, Spock, and the adventures, the original 5-year mission, and then just give it new life. I think the the Trek universe had gotten a bit tired, and it would become a little stale in a lot of ways. And it was time to sort of wipe the slate clean and start over, and that's exactly what they did. And I think they're in good shape, and they're what I've heard is that they're working on another movie, and I'm sure they'll have a long run with that crew.
I wanted to see them as old men. That'd be funny.
Oh, Christian over the front, he's been waiting a minute or two.
What kind of scope do you have in mind with Caprica? Are you going to keep it quite centralized around Caprica, or are you going to sort of explore the first Cylon War, sort of move out into space sort of thing? And also, are you planning to just sort of keep it in kind of real-time senses, or are you planning to have sort of jumping forward years, a bit like you did it in Galactica 3rd Series, where it jumped forward a year or so?
We've talked about doing jumps, and jumping the timeline ahead here and there. That's certainly something that's on the table for us. We are going to go out and see more of the colonies in the second half of this season already. You'll definitely be going to see Geminon, and we're talking about some of the other colonies as well. I don't know that it'll really be a space-based show at any point. I think conceptually the show really is planet-based, and it'll probably always be about the people in the city of Caprica and the planet of Caprica as we go forward.
Also, we get to see Toron.
Yeah. Oh, and we get to see Toron as well. Yeah.
And how long does a typical episode production take for you guys? I mean, what's a typical day like for you, Ron, and in a sense, a typical day like for you, Esai?
Well, my days are easier than Esai's days, but it takes us 8 days to shoot an episode. There's 7 days of prep that lead up to shooting that episode, and in those 7 days, the director comes aboard for the first time, reads the script, gives comments and questions and notes, and we're rewriting the script all through pre-production. And it's in those days of prep that you're meeting with all the various department heads, the art department, costume, visual effects, special effects, and so on. And you're really working through all the pieces that you're going to need to actually shoot the episode. And then it takes 8 days to actually shoot it. We shoot a lot on location. If you look at Caprica, you'll see that we really only have about 2 standing sets. There's really just the Adama apartment and the Greystone house, and those are the only really permanent sets that we have on sound stages. And everything else is shot on location out and around the city of Vancouver. And as a result, that makes for very hectic days that you can attest to.
Yeah, well, we don't have typical days because every script is different in as far as the content. We do have typical scenes at the house, or the Greystone mansion, or in the boardroom, but every day is different. Sometimes you'll have days where we work 16 hours, 17 hours. Other times I won't work. I'll have 2 or 3 scenes and then I can go home half day. That's the hard thing for an actor, is on your off time to keep yourself tethered just enough to your character so that you come back to work after 5 or 6 days off. You don't have to go, wait, where was I? It's keep focused without, have fun on your time off without getting too far away from your main mission.
Question from this man here.
You're talking about the number of sets that you have for Caprica. Roughly how many usual sets did you have for Battlestar?
Well, Battlestar was very different. In a lot of ways, Battlestar was easier to produce than Caprica is because of that. On Battlestar, we had 3 full sound stages that contained just the Battlestar Galactica. We had a lot of corridor, we had CIC, we had all their quarters, we had the hangar deck, we had a lot of the actual ship. And then we took over a 4th sound stage, a smaller one at one point, to house the Cylon base ship. And then we would go out on location a couple of days each episode. Caprica is the flip of that. We have a couple of days on our 2 standing sets, and then most of the rest of it's on location. And it's more difficult because you're taking an entire company, cast, crew, and production staff, and you're moving them around the city. And some days you're not just going to one location, you might be going to 2 or 3 different locations, putting all the gear and equipment back in the trucks, driving it off to the next location, setting it up, bringing the cast, setting up makeup, blah, 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 and then shooting there, and then packing it all up again and moving to the next one. And it's very hard, it's tiring, and it eats up time, and time is money in television. And so those are the difficulties of shooting Caprica. On Battlestar, because most of the sets were right there at the studio, you could cram a lot of pages into those days, and it was a safety net for us. If we needed to save money on Battlestar, you could always shoot some more set stuff in the corridors. You could just go shoot in CIC or Adama's quarters again. We don't really have that luxury in Caprica. We've still got to go out and do stuff in the street. We've still got to make you believe that you're on a planet, not just trapped in somebody's house.
Okay, and we've got time for at least 2 more questions, and I can see them now. Start off over this gentleman here.
Go back, say, 20 years and so, and the series was essentially setting up an area for lots of standalone plot to take place, and more we're seeing long plot threads that interweave. But have you got little stories that come to mind and you think, what, it doesn't really fit in entirely with everything else, but this is something that I want that to stand by itself as an episode, where it doesn't necessarily completely tie into everything else?
Not so much. I mean, this show was designed to be really much more of a serial or a soap opera than Battlestar was. I mean, Battlestar had those elements to it, but Battlestar was a little easier to think of, here's a little one-off idea that doesn't really click into everything else, and let's wrap an episode around that. In Caprica, it's all sort of a piece, and there's this large moving tapestry that we're creating, and if something doesn't really fit within it, we tend not to go into those directions.
We have time for our final question from this gentleman here.
With the success of the Battlestar and Caprica universe, are you planning on expanding more with maybe one-offs like The Plan did, or are there more possibilities for singular episodes or singular feature-length episodes?
There's many options that are on the table. Universal's been in discussion with us about doing a possible other spin-off of the Galactic Universe in some format. We've had talks about other one-offs like the Plan and Razor, but a lot of this is just all in the talking phase, and I think we're still early enough in the sort of history of this particular universe that it's hard to say what the possibilities are and are not. I think there's many things that we could do in the future. There's many ways that people might want to play around with this universe. There's, Bryan Singer is developing a feature version that really has nothing to do with our version of the Battlestar mythos. So I think it's an interesting world to tell stories in, and hopefully people will continue to be interested in seeing stories told in that universe, and there'll be people like myself and others that are interested in telling them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a massive round of applause to our guests in Caprica, Esai Morales and Ron D. Moore.
Thank you.
And don't forget, these gentlemen are free signing this weekend at the Expo, so you'll be able to get some free signatures from these 2 talented young gentlemen, and we will be able to ask them